Hello, dear friends. Today is August 6, Wednesday. The negotiations of the Special Ambassador Trump Witkoff ended in Moscow. He has already left the United States. The day before, Putin's assistant, Ushakov, very schematically described what happened during the 3 hours negotiations. In addition to the representatives of the Putin administration, Witkoff also had a short meeting, as far as I understand, a short one with Putin. Well, Ushakov was extremely angry, marked literally several points what was being talked about. The first, Witkoff brought some signals from Trump to Putin. Putin sent some signals back to Trump through Witkoff. The ultimatum of Trump about Putin's need to accept Trump's request for a 30-day ceasefire. Pushakov did not say a word about this. There were reports of a leak in the mass information tool that instead of this, well, to sweet talk. Kremlin suggested announcing more raiders for air attacks, which, in general, should not be interesting for Ukraine, since it deprives it of the opportunity to effectively defend itself in the battlefields. Well, as a big carrot or sweet, Ushakov stated that the sides discussed the possibility of strategic cooperation. According to this cooperation, as I understand it, there were some exertional aspects of the relationship between the Kremlin administration and the White House administration, which will allow Trump to assume that millions are coming from Moscow through him in the bright future. Well, how does he tell this now to the public about those millions that he expects from the European Union? 600 billion which the European Union does not have and cannot be, as he expects, also somewhere, either 600 or 700 billion from Saudi Arabia, which he will hardly see either, and 500 billion from Japan, also Najd Unishin eats. Well, now he apparently has Putin in turn, who drew his own billion. Urshakov's delay was explained by the fact that, according to him, the Kremlin wants Witkoff to report real and full of the negotiations that took place with Trump. After that, as expected, Trump will make a statement about Russia. Well then, as Urshakov said, we will probably be able to replenish our comments. Without waiting, as far as I understand, apparently, Witkoff was still in the air, without waiting for his return. Trump wrote to his social network that he partially from Witkoff, partially from other sources of information about what happened in the negotiations in the Kremlin and further. My special ambassador, Steve Witkoff, just had a very productive meeting with the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. A significant progress will be achieved. After that, I informed some of our European allies. Everyone is agreeing that this war should end, and we will be working on it in the coming days and weeks. Thank you for your attention to this question. I pay attention to the fact that Trump did not mention a telephone conversation with Zelensky here, judging by what Zelensky wrote. Trump said not only to the European leaders but to him too, and apparently these negotiations were such a group or collective telephone conversation. Well, apparently Zelensky was taken to European allies in general, so let's sorry Trump for this omission. It must be said that this day was expected with interest, with alarm, and even with some tense, well, in particular in Europe. There was an argue over what would end these negotiations with Witkoff. Almost the totalitar was set by informed people, but two groups of comments came to mind. I will give you the most objective, which reflect both of these camps. So yesterday, the British admiral in the lag behind Perry said that Trump is obligated to impose tough sanctions against Russia, then against the countries that buy Russian oil and thereby subsidize or finance Putin's bloody leak in Ukraine. Apparently, Trump has nowhere to go now the war in Ukraine has become his war, no longer to be turned away. Before he said, "This is not mine, this is Trump, everything, it is over." Now, the political future, well, in general, the political inherited of Trump depends on the course of this war. Or he will lose it and then it will be a worse failure than Biden had a failure in Afghanistan, or he will achieve success, and then he will be the greatest Doni Makedonsky, the greatest colonel and diplomat in the history of mankind, I said. But today the UK ambassador to Russia, former Lee Turner, was more reserved. He described the situation, the real opposition between Trump and Putin. It is really quite tense because until the ultimatum of Trump expired, it remained until Friday, that is it. The ultimatum was that Putin had to enter a 30-day moratorium on military operations. Putin is not going to do this, and now this is a game, chicken game, as they are called. When two people on two sides of the speed cars are racing each other on a narrow road, and someone has to become this chicken and turn, or both will break apart, the argue was about who would become this chicken. The former ambassador said that this is called, taco is translated that Trump is a chicken that will definitely drafe at the end of the day. And the ambassador of the UK believes that it will be Trump again, who drafe, not Putin. According to the results, the negotiations of Witkoff ended in Moscow. By the way, the ambassador said that this is an indicator and this is idiotism, the use of Witkoff as a special ambassador of Trump in these negotiations. Well, because he is a developer, apparently a good developer, $1 billion has been earned, not a stupid person, but not in the topic. Everyone should do their own thing. This is the first thing, that is, for him it is all a dark forest. And the second thing, well, it was obvious already after the first meeting with Putin, and this was today the 6th, I think, meeting with Witkoff, and when he told Tucker Carlson about this meeting, he looked shocked. That is, the most great pale prayer of the Kremlin accepted him and carried out negotiations with him, and he talked literally about shock and expressed Kremlin relations, the central reason why he said that Ukraine is not a real state, which in fact already characterizes the mentality, mood, and ability, or rather, the non-ability of this person to be Trump's special ambassador. That is, he was purchased, I mean in the wide sense of the word, she was charmed, she probably promised something, and it became a big question here, whether he is a special ambassador of Trump in these negotiations, or whether he is the operator of the Kremlin, Putin's narrative and influence on Trump. This is a big question. So as soon as this ended, I was looking for indicators of how this meeting ended, and what even not so much how the meeting ended, because the point is not only about what will happen today, but also about what will happen on 8th, because the sanctions against Russia in particular should be introduced on 8th. Well, and then further, that is, the situation goes far beyond the boundaries of today's negotiations. Well, I assumed that probably the most objective source of information would be Fox News, because if Trump is going to play the role of a chicken, then Fox News should definitely go back and explain why he did it. From nowhere, it turned out the situation was different. Fox News, yes, and in general, I noticed the last day 4 or 5. Fox News is also gradually becoming a hawk in the relationship of Russia. That is, the tough tone is getting more and more. Putin needs to pressure Russia, and so Fox News reports. Witkoff met with Putin. The agreement on the ceasefire is not announced. Then it seems that the 3-hour meeting did not bring any results in the plan to ensure a peace agreement or even a bypass of the threatening sanctions of Trump, which now threaten Putin. That is, they say, Fox Channels says that Witkoff has not even achieved any concessions from Putin, which could be written off if Trump now decides to retreat like a wounded chicken. However, Fox Channel continues, according to Yury, Putin's advisor, the meeting was useful and instructive. Well, there are signals here, one sent it there, the other sent it there, the signal is clear. The advisor also reported to journalists that Putin and Witkoff discussed the development of a strategic partnership between the United States and Russia. Well, I didn't clarify what it was. Geschichte, guys, is a tragic Geschichte prophecy. The myth, let's say the myth, because the Europeans in the 18th package, they killed the most covetous, large-scale Geschichte possible project between Putin and Trump about the supply of cheap Russian gas through northern flows to Germany. Uzhakov arrived in Moscow in the last attempt to convince Putin to give way to Trump's demands, although, as the head of the Kremlin expected, he hardly will go to serious concessions. Well, that's it. That is the last attempt to convince, but there was no announcement of a moratorium for Putin's agreement, so the attempt turned out to be unsuccessful. I have a question sometimes. Where did Trump get this great success of those negotiations that Witkoff carried out in Moscow? Well, Trump said that he heard it from somewhere. It will be interesting to hear further comments, in particular, his statement on this particular question, if he does it. He hopes that today, somewhere in the evening, he should do it all. So, telling about all this, Fox says that Trump expected to introduce very tough sanctions against Russia if Putin does not conclude an agreement with the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, first. 50. Then all this was reduced to 8. A tough tone, Fox News, which does not leave Trump with the opportunity to become a chicken. Grassel said to Mural Abik, the time has come on, this is, I will tell you, this is the only channel that will support Trump's foreign policy. The negotiations with Witkoff took place under a specific background, that is, Moscow did not even count as necessary to somehow soften the pill for Witkoff. And through him for Trump, that is, Ushakov said whether the signal was sent. Here it is interesting, Trump understood what this signal was or not. And the signal is the following: NATO raised concerns about the fighters after the attack of Russian drones near the border. I mean the border with Romania, when it happened while Witkoff was meeting with Putin. And the attack of Russia occurred in several days before the end of the fire set by President Trump expired. Details: on the night of June 5, Russian troops carried out a massive strike with drones on civil infrastructure in the area of Izmail, Ukraine, close to the border with Romania. Unmanned vehicles hit oil and gas lines at a plant or enterprise Orlovka in Odessa. A bright orange fire of the Stolbia Duma was seen through the Danube River. This attack can signal that Putin does not plan on approaching the conclusion of the agreement on the ceasefire, despite Trump's ultimatum. It is not clear whether Witkoff's visit will be able to push the Russian leader to a peaceful settlement. Now it's clear it didn't push. However, if Moscow does not conclude sanctions until Friday, the United States will introduce sanctions against Russia and, possibly, secondary tariffs. Trump is putting pressure on Witkoff in connection with his visit. One of the sources close to the administration reported to the Financial Times, and Financial Times a couple of days ago published this article, that if Witkoff comes back with empty hands, Trump will get angry at absolutely nothing. But judging by, again, returning to Trump's post on his page on Truth Social or Public Truth, he did not get angry but came to the surprise or state of inspiration for the results, as he said, of the great progress that Witkoff allegedly reached. Next, as the British The Telegraph reports, tariff sanctions against Russia as expected will be introduced. On Friday, August 8, when this ultimatum expires. And this is despite the fact that Trump characterizes the meeting and negotiations of Witkoff in the Kremlin as positive. Not waiting for Witkoff to hit the ground, Trump is entering his plan action, and it must be said that this plan yesterday they broke their heads whether this plan is there or not. This plan, he so far gains certain contours, they just need to be decrypted and bring together the action. I will tell you so. Apparently, Trump's plan, which he is going to, the one he launched today, more than further, consists of two main components. The first is economic infiltration or pressure of Russia by limited exports of its oil. And the second is, it went literally 2 days ago, a new mechanism worked through NATO, the supply of American weapons to Ukraine. The first supply has already been made. I will tell you about it later. So, without waiting for Witkoff to arrive in the White House with a report, Trump signs an order. In this order, he announces Russia as the only threat to the United States of America. This is a quote. That is, on the one hand, it is a great success in the negotiations of Witkoff, which he wrote in a public truth on his page. On the other hand, the president's order from Trump, Russia, is an only threat to the United States, and Trump makes an economic strike, but on India. Before there were talks about India and China, now everything is focused on India. India will have to make the main strike of these economic sanctions, which Trump announces in order to pressure Putin. Judging by what was written in the American and European press recently, the thinking about how to pressure Russia in order for Ukraine, in a positive plan for itself to complete this war. Apparently, it was decided to make the main accent on the economic and financial impetus of Russia. As for the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine, apparently, a decision was made there by strengthening the supplies of weapons, somehow stabilizing the situation. But the main strike, taking into account, as the difficult situation in the Russian economy, the financial sphere, the strike needs to be made exactly on the economy. And they decided to put it through India. Why through India? Because, as I said, Trump is wearing out plans, or perhaps his diplomats or special ambassadors are already working in this direction to make an unexpected and massive, I would say, approach from the United States and from India, as Nixon did in 71, 72. Well, and then India is not China. India does not have global ambitions. China has. It has the opportunity to answer the United States. And one of the harsh response of China and the opportunity is the restriction of supplies of rare land metals. By the way, another complication or restriction of such supplies was announced by China literally 3 days ago. That is, they chose a boy for BTA. According to his order, Trump stated that he is introducing additional customs, tariffs of 25% for import from India, or rather for import to India, Russian oil, which is an important source of income for the Kremlin. Thus, the total scale of the tariffs that are now applied to India will be 50%. 25% has already been announced, now even more if India continues to buy Russian oil. These 50% are the tariffs on import of Chinese goods and services to the United States. This is not small, this is serious. At 100% of the tariff, he actually kills the entire import. Here it is on the border. Well, I must say that India was first worried about this, then in shock, but the last literally 10 weeks, a whole flow of unwavering official people from India, including military people, representatives of the special services, went to Moscow, where they carried out intensive negotiations, after which such statements from Delhi were heard, such as "We are a sovereign state, we will not allow it," and so on. Well, here it is. These 25 plus another 25.5% are included. A strong strike? Well, then I will tell you. It is believed that with the help of India, it is possible to make a serious strike on foreign exchange. Payments to Russia from the exports of Russian oil. Next, Trump's office reports that he received additional information from various high-ranking sources, including about the actions of the Russian government in relation to the situation in Ukraine. And this information means that, attention, Moscow represents an unusual and extremely threat to the national security and external policies of the United States. But I will tell you so, when the President of the United States makes such a statement, and then, if he comes to the world as a chicken that braved. But this is a collapse. This is the collapse of the entire presidency. It will be stuck all over the world. It will be stuck in the United States of America. And here inside, the situation is not simple for him. That is, a split is already going on somewhere, in the depths of the magician himself. The most senseless his supporters are so loud-mouthed, therefore effective, they are already refusing this madness. Marjorie Taylor Greene is an option for the deputies of the madness of the United States of America. She has already said that she is going to break through the Republican Party at all. How loud is it in the middle of the sky? Well, and the observers say that this phrase that Trump used, it is significantly different from the one that was used at the beginning of the year, when Trump did everything possible to calm Putin down in order to fool him, in order to sit at the negotiating table. I think it is necessary to introduce an additional tax on the import of goods from India, which is directly or indirectly importing oil from the Russian Federation. Well, there are also insiders in the White House, a means of mass information, that the administration also thinks about how to strengthen sanctions against the so-called shade fleet of Russia. So the first step, the strike to India, the order is signed, the plan began to work. As the British The Telegram wrote the day before, the peaceful plan of Trump for Ukraine, the first step is to force India to pay for the financial and economic pressure of Russia. As the newspaper Science Workers said, the famous analytics center chatting house in the world, Timothy Green, such a step of Trump with the introduction of these tariffs will have a serious consequences. Russia's exports will decrease to the minimum, the budget gains will almost completely stop, we will become a sign of the mass withdrawal of funds from the Russian banks from the strong pressure on rubles. This is if these tariffs, sanctions were introduced not only against India, but also against China. However, why did they decide to stop only in this state against India? Because if it were introduced against China, then although the consequences for Moscow would be serious, this would also cause turbulence on the international markets and would lead to a sharp price increase in oil, and in this way it would cause the most strong negative strike on the world economy. This is a threat, that is, to impose sanctions at the same time against India and against China, and potential consequences for the world economy. They looked so suicide and stupid that the investors and serious analysts at first just wave away from this threat of Trump, like from bravado, which they are already used to. But in recent days, a more reserved package of sanctions aimed at India, and only India, began to form. At the same time, it pays attention that Trump has been lately avoiding threats in the direction of China, the largest consumer of Russian energy resources. But look, there are some numbers that indicate that India and China, they play an almost even role now as a source of financial supplies to the Russian treasury for the exports of oil. The role of India. Before the invasion of the 22nd year, Russian oil was only 0.2% of India's import, and today it is 45%. That is, the Indian army has warmed its hands on Russian aggression in the most self-harmful way possible. You know, there are places in Western Africa where diamonds are mined, and they are constantly going there. In any case, there were previous wars for control over these diamond coffins. A lot of blood was poured into the mercenaries. The mercenaries participated in these wars. There were almost no soldiers left. Well, as a result, these diamonds were called blood diamonds on the European markets. And a powerful company went about prohibiting the trade of these diamonds because there is blood on them. You cannot do business on goods that are earned with the help of mass murders. Well, about the same, I believe that it can be used. I don't know why it is not said yet. World pressure, world policies have disappeared. At least for the allies of Ukraine, but on a large scale, this industry in India is, and is money on the blood. This is bloody oil. And the Hindus, it's not by chance they were in this case, because I watch how they behave here. There are no more scary people during trade. Let's say, well, the most noticeable is in the dealership where cars are sold. There are no more scary people than Windows. He can come in a luxurious car, somewhere like that on the eve of the party, the pre-party day, when there are already half an hour left before the deal is over, and spend 2 or 3 hours in order to take a discount from the new car there, in the size of $150 or $200. That is, it is some kind of horror. They pull, interfere, and the dealers here in America, they just hatred them. This is the nature, and so it is everywhere. So they buy houses there, they buy everything they want. So it is not by chance they increased from 0.2% to 45% the import of Russian oil. They then process it and the ready product as its own. They then throw it on the foreign market. At the moment, China is buying 47% of Russian exported oil, India 37%. Well, that is, the difference is 10%, but nevertheless, this is a very, very strong strike. But the escalation, is going on gradually, and therefore they decided to make this step. First, so that they do not shoot themselves in the leg with the collapse of the Western economy, and secondly, to see how this case will go with one India. Why else there is such a, well, where is Trump, there is a joke of humor. Why did they choose India? After all, Trump was recently said and wrote that there were good relations with the Prime Minister of Modi. The fact is that Trump has cooled down to Modi. Trump has announced himself as an arbitrator who has stopped the war between India and Pakistan. He carried out several telephone conversations and said that Donald Trump had stopped this war. After that, Pakistan made an official call to the numerous committee to transfer Trump to the numerous prize. After that, Trump promised huge help to Pakistan in the development of oil resources in the country, as well as mass military aid. That is, a close-up occurred, the head of the general staff was invited, the armed forces of Pakistan, Trump had either lunch or lunch. But Modi said that Trump did not play a noticeable role in the stop of the war between the two countries, so there is no doubt about the neutrality of the Nobel Peace Prize for him. And in this way, Modi, I don't know what he is leading, but he signed an Indian death sentence for himself, seeing these sanctions that are now following. But nevertheless, as the British newspaper, The Telegraph, emphasizes, some analysts believe that Trump has sincerely changed his opinion about Putin, Russia, and the situation. In Ukraine, he came to the conclusion that only a significant pressure on Putin, who believes that has an advantage on the battlefield, only such a pressure can make him sit at the table of negotiations. In the United States, in the administration, there was an opinion that India can already put an end to the war in Ukraine tomorrow. And for this, Modi just has to take a side. From where? Where does all this come from? Well, 37%. That is, if half of the oil, only the Indian one, is removed, then, according to the idea of Putin's payments, they can be halved. At least, in this connection, the representative of the White House, and this is the deputy to the chief of the administration, Stephen Miller, he called the continuation of the purchases of India and Russian oil unacceptable, categorically unacceptable, and that's it. Although when the statement was made, it was still not clear how India was ready to weaken its data relations with Russia. In order to take the question of whether to give American pressure or not, India should take a strategic decision. It is also located, as it is believed, in Delhi, in an enemy environment. On the one hand, it is China, on the other hand, it is Pakistan. And Dacha na Sivir is a traditional ally since the times of the Soviet Union, Russia. And a significant part of the equipment for the armed forces of India was once purchased in Russia. They depend on the repair base, the reserve units there, and so on. But what is important, what is Stephen Miller? He is considered one of the most firm-willed magicians, who, in hostile almost hostile relations was in the relation. I'm not talking about the Democrats, even in the relation to the Republicans and the Reaganists, when they said that the United States should play an active role in foreign policy. This one acted for autonomy, don't interfere, and so on. That is, what he now says is that in order for Ukraine to stop the war, it is necessary to pressure India in order for Russia to have half of its budget. It means that even part of the mage, even inside the administration, there was no such unity before. Before it was between the two sides, then one side prevailed, then the other side prevailed, and now there is some core that includes representatives of different views. Both Reaganists and such firm-willed sorcerers as Miller. That is, there is such a shell around Trump, from the people, the number of which is growing more and more, which can be called potential supporters of Ukraine, and to them now. As I told at the very beginning, it is possible to even list the Fox channel, which is becoming more and more sharp, formulating what the administration should do in relation to Russia, and the help of Ukraine. As I said, India has been doing a very pleasant work for the last, somewhere, at least a week, in order to solve a fundamental question for itself. At the very beginning, as soon as the Americans launched this ultimatum, 4 state oil companies immediately refused to buy oil. There was a private company, and a private company is like this, which is psychologically and tactically similar to those Indian companies that, as I said, buy cars and all that kind of stuff here. That is, for some $100, not to mention the billion, they are ready to remove themselves. The country is still a democratic government. It will depend on them, on their funding. That is, the question is complex. But nevertheless, in the administration there is such a thought that, on the one hand, there is a diplomatic pragmatism. The Indians have strong diplomacy. Qualified personnel are prepared. Well, their pragmatism lies in the transactional relations. That is, it is the same as Trump. It is coming close to them. Under such a wise word, the transactional relationship turns out to be a geshev, that's all. Although on the other hand, the geostrategical situation is the presence of China on the borders of India. With CM, on the other hand, India is a part of the Quad, a military political, it can be called an economic bloc, which was reborn, in fact, in the time of the Biden administration. It's an alliance of Japan, of Australia, of the United States of America, which, plus India, which is aimed at China and thereby against Russia. And India is very interested in the further development of relations in the ranks of this organization, the Quad. And this will push it away from close relations with Russia and the formation of some formal allied relations between the two countries. That is, military in idea, as Washington believes, is interested in the development of relations with the United States and, in general, the full transition to the refusal of military technical cooperation with Russia and the full reorientation of the United States. Moreover, as the aggressive war of Russia in Ukraine shows, well, it actually discredits Russian weapons and especially the conventional system of weapons. And it's obvious that the future is beyond the West and not beyond China or Russia, but this is one direction. That's what the administration is going to work in now. It's going to beep in. I don't think it'll be half measures because Europe won't allow it. Europe won't allow it inside the United States, as I told you. Some kind of core has already developed in the administration, the realists or pragmatists who require pressure after all. They understand that the collapse or success of Trump's administration in general, to a significant degree, depends on the outcome of the war in Ukraine. Well, plus also a means of mass information, so Trump's administration has already begun to act in the second direction, which is the strengthening of weapons, the armed forces of Ukraine. Trump told them that NATO should play the most active role in this new scheme. The scheme was worked out according to the agreement between Trump and Rutte. They, so to speak, put a point over them after this on July 14, when Rutte came to Washington. That is, NATO is becoming a responsible organizer, a coordinator, and before a halved point, the transfer of American weapons through NATO to Ukraine in exchange for the money that is going to the United States through NATO. In this connection, as the Wall Street Journal reports, the United States sells weapons to Europe for the transfer of Ukraine to an amount of $1 billion. This is one of the most clear demonstrations of the change in the course of the West, first and foremost, the United States, in the matter of arms Ukraine against Russia. In this scheme, 4 European countries buy military equipment from the United States for an amount of about $1 billion for the supply of Kiev troops to the U.S. Selling weapons of American production to NATO countries in this way, Trump is bringing in $1 billion to U.S. industry and forcing Europe to take responsibility for its own defense industry. This was said by the press of the White House. It is expected that these European purchases, which are carried out within 2 separate dealings and are coordinated, will become the first of many financed by the European government and Canada in accordance with the fundamental agreement, which was reached earlier this summer. In this deal, the payers are Netherlands, which was then joined by Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Scandinavians, Vikings, brother by blood. In a report in the Austrian journal, it is said that a package of this help includes ammunition, critically important equipment, and means against air defense, including Patriot interceptor missiles. Well, that is, the mechanism has worked, the process has gone. Gentlemen, we are watching what will happen next. Today, it is possible that Trump will make some kind of statement. We will monitor him. Well, in the near future, I hope through the leak of information, we will hear what kind of colossal success Witkoff achieved in the negotiations in the Kremlin. But we heard through the media, the Western one, that Moscow tried to take the question and topic of conversation away from the general ceasefire for 30 days about the direction of the moratoria on air operations. Air operations in idea should include itself, that is, it is an attack by drones, missiles, and aviation. You have to wait for the details, of course, because if it includes itself, the ceasefire of air attacks on the cities of Ukraine, it is serious. This is a heavy case, a 30-day pause. I can imagine how a worn-out country, Ukraine, is tired of these night mass bombings. Although on the other hand, as the Warrior notes, the Western Front is now being held significantly thanks to drones. I told you about these dead zones, in which drones play an extremely important role, especially when there is a lack of live force and servicemen. Beginning to appear, that is, if such a moratorium is announced on the operation of drones in the battlefields, then this can become a very dangerous decision. Therefore, details need to be waited for well, and then the military should evaluate the possibility and purpose of such a move, such a cut, I said it, or a cut moratoria. And here, as they say, at the last minute of the match, the last news. Trump reported to the European leader in a telephone conversation that he plans to meet with Putin in the near future. Perhaps this will happen in the next week, and then, after the meeting with Putin, he intends to hold a three-way meeting, which will be joined by Vladimir Zelensky. About this, the CNN companies reported two sources, a source from the administration of the United States, as well as confirmed European leaders or representatives of European countries that participated in this conversation. One of the newcomers to the White House directly noted, however, that from a logistical point of view, it would be very, very difficult to organize such a meeting. The terms are too contracted, there is no time for preparation. According to him, the Russians expressed a desire to meet with President Trump, and the president is open for a meeting both with President Putin and with President Zelensky. President Trump wants this cruel war to end. This was stated by the press secretary of the White House, Caroline Leavitt. Well, let's think about it, let's listen to what else is added about this plan from the White House, the capital of the European, and from Bank. To be honest, I'm far from joy, from a happy agitation. Trump and Zelensky at this meeting, they can become victims of manipulations. Psychological manipulations pressure all sorts of processing which such great masters have in Moscow and in the Kremlin. Well, Trump in. Relation to Putin, one-on-one, this is a failure match at all. This should have been avoided until the end. We have already seen these meetings of these two figures in Helsinki during the first term of President Trump. After they both left there and presented themselves before the audience for the press conference, Trump was scary and it was pitiful to look at him. Zelensky, what can Zelensky bring in there? Here, apparently, it will be presented to Zelensky and Trump that plan, so to speak, a global regularization from the point of view of Russia, as they say, and today in the Kremlin, this army logic was used. The Ukrainian crisis, not the aggression of Russia against Ukraine and the sovereign state, not a military crime, but the Ukrainian crisis. So they will definitely imagine their plan of the Ukrainian crisis, the so-called political crisis, which I told you about in the previous video. Who did not watch, look, this is a video about Sachs and this plan of Russian Kremlin regularization, which is being carried out there recently. On this, dear friends, let me end this video. And as usual, glory to Ukraine by the armed forces. The enemy will be broken, victory will be ours. You, friends, hold out the courage, firm believe in our inevitable victory. See you soon.